Hello, welcome to another episode of UNtracing Trauma. I'm your host, JeGaysus, and we have a special guest, as always, here to talk about their story, about their healing process, about where they are now. We'll do some quick little housekeeping things up front. Since the show is called UNtracing Trauma, there may be some points where we talk about things that are trauma sensitive, just to give you a warning as a viewer or as an audience. If you're not able to participate, totally fine. I just want to give you the trigger warning up front, and episodes may not always be best for children, so if you are a parent, maybe save this one for later or screen it first before you decide if it's appropriate. And outside of that, thank you to my Patreon, as always. We'll go ahead and list you in the credits, and I think that's pretty much it for updates for myself, so I think we should just jump right into the episode. So today I have my guest on, J.K. Would you go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience?
Hey, how's it going? I am J.K Emezi. I run an addiction recovery service called Elevated Recovery, and we help primarily men end their compulsive behaviors. And a little bit later on in the episode, I'll be talking more about the exact type of compulsive behaviors that we help men with. But I'm excited to be here. And this is the first time I am hearing you pronounce your name. Could you say it again? Yeah, I think
it's
really
JeGaysus.
cool.
Yeah,
JeGaysus.
it's a complicated one to get down.
Name, or is it?
No. It's my character
cool.
name. It's my social media presence name, if you will.
Yeah.
But if you totally mispronounce it, I don't care, because it took me forever to even just get that right. And I totally understand. You could also just call me Jay if you want to. I don't care.
It's memorable. I'll call you JeGaysus.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I'm so glad to have you here. And we were just talking before we went live. I think that you have a really interesting story and a different point of view than maybe my past guests have had. But like you said, we'll get into that in a second, mainly for the YouTube algorithm overlords. But if you could, where are you from originally?
Well, right now I'm in Wichita, Kansas. I was born in Nigeria, Nigerian dad,
Oh, wow.
Malaysian mom. And I kind of have had the benefit of growing up on 3 continents. So
very cool.
Yeah, went to high school in Nigeria, went to college in Malaysia, and also college in the US. I've been in the States. I'm an American citizen. I've been here for a little over 20 years and built several businesses here. But my main thing right now is working with men struggling with this compulsive behavior.
Sure. So you went to college in the States and then you just kind of stayed? Is that what happened?
Yeah, I travel a lot, but yeah, I kind of...
You're I like it here. We're staying here.
Yeah. It's
cool.
I like it here. It fulfills my needs at this stage of my life. So yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, I did not know that you were foreign at all. So that's very interesting. I talk about it sometimes on my channel, but my family history on my grandma's side, she's Nigerian. I'm if I want to get all crazy from the DNA test, I'm 18% Nigerian and then 10% sub-Saharan African, just in general.
Yeah.
But yeah. Huh?
It's probably there in your curls.
Yeah. The majority of my black side is the Nigerian part, for sure. So that's cool. I've always wanted to go, but there's some sketchy things with me being gay, and I don't necessarily want to visit with some of the laws they have, but that's neither here nor there. So what was it like growing up in Nigeria? Were you from a religious family? Walk me through your adolescence.
Very much so. I grew up in a conservative Catholic family, and very conservative. We went to mass. We said the rosary every evening. We prayed. And at one point while I was growing up, I even wanted to be a priest. I was that devout towards it. And it really wasn't a thing of being Nigerian. I think, having worked with thousands of clients at this point, I find that regardless of where you come from in the world, if religion is a part of your childhood, especially if you come from a conservative background, some of your worldview, some of the issues you may face later on in life will be similar across cultures. As a matter of fact, I will go as far as to say that religion had more of an impact on my life in a both positive and negative way than the actual culture of the place that I grew up in. And that's the power of religion. The
I
power
could
it can
see
have
that
over
being
you.
true,
It doesn't matter, like
100%.
whether you're in Africa, Asia, or whatever. It's just like
Yeah.
religion just overwhelms all those things because it puts the religious dogma before your culture. If your
Mm-hmm.
culture had polygamy in it, if it was diverse in beliefs, religion just removes all of those things, and so the culture doesn't matter as much
I was
later
gonna
on.
say it's the great equalizer via colonization,
Yeah,
really.
it basically just it was like their very very impressively effective tool. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was the sword that they used, and it was very effective. Get people to be um, afraid, get them to believe.
Yep.
People who perhaps already had beliefs about the afterlife and were very confident about what was going to happen to them when they passed. Well, create an alternative for them and say, like, hey, if you don't do these things the way we do them, then
Mm-hmm.
something horrible is going to happen to you. So you better start keeping track right now. We're going to tell you how to
This is
keep
your wake
track
up
and what to
call.
do. Yeah.
Yeah. That's so interesting because like I love the way that you put that, that no matter where you're from, anyone from like a religious background has that same kind of, I want to say, like building blocks that is burned into your brain, and so that we all kind of experience similar issues. And that's a really good way to put that. 'Cause I never necessarily thought about it, especially because coming from America, we don't have like really strong sense of culture. There's definitely, like black culture is a lot more strong, and it's rooted though within having to overcome systemic racism more than it is in any kind of like ethnic culture, right?
True.
So I think it's really interesting how you say that it even comes before cultural practices and traditions and beliefs. Is I don't know enough about Nigeria, unfortunately, even though my grandmother immigrated here. She died when I was like 4, so I didn't get a
Mm.
lot of stories. Um, what is Christianity like the primary religion, or even Catholicism specifically, or is Catholicism more on the not popular side of Nigeria? I don't know what the demographics are.
Yeah, its population is probably about 300 million by now and very populous. And it's a good mix between Islam and Christianity.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a good mix between both of them. But again, various forms of Christianity from evangelical speaking in tongues and healing and all
Mm-hmm.
that stuff to the more conservative Catholic type. Um,
Okay, cool. So you were raised within Catholicism, which means I assume that your parents were religious,
yeah. My
and that's
parents
how.
were definitely religious, which led to what I'm doing right now. So at this point, what we do, the compulsive behavior, as I promised I was going to mention, that we help men with, is
Oh yeah, I think
sexually.
we can get into it more now
Yeah,
because we're
yeah.
past the
It's
mark.
yeah, it's sexually compulsive behaviors, specifically behaviors with high speed internet pornography, compulsive behaviors with high speed internet pornography. So when somebody grows up in a society where sex is not something that's openly talked about, or you are taught as a child that sex is it's sinful if engaged in outside the confines of marriage, and it's
Mm-hmm.
only for married people. Yet you still grow up watching movies and getting exposed to media that shows that it's the way people live versus what your parents or church is telling you is very different.
Yeah.
Well, then you're obviously going to get curious about it. So it was also a society where um, corporal punishment was very much real there. So basically, people whooped their kids.
Yeah.
Branches, sticks, slippers, like flip flops, whatever your parents could get their hands on, they would do that.
Sure.
Um, so I'll just go into my history with this. I think that will be
Yeah, I was gonna
helpful.
say
Yeah.
let's
That'll be
start with
helpful.
how that affected you personally, for sure.
Yeah. I remember both my parents were in the medical field. I remember I was about 8 years old, and we had a nanny who was also just like an adult cousin who was taking
Okay.
care of us. and she had a comic book that she was reading, and I loved comics. I actually still do, but I just didn't. She wouldn't let me read it. And as a kid, I was determined. I was like, I'm gonna find out what you're reading.
Yeah,
So
the forbidden fruit. Now I want to
yeah,
know.
searched her room, found it under the bed, and it turned out to be pornographic in nature.
Okay.
Had a totally messed up theme. But this was my first exposure to sex at 8 years old. Now I'm eight. At that point, I wasn't capable of being sexually aroused,
Yeah.
but I did understand that from my upbringing, what I was viewing was bad, it was naughty, and um, there was a reaction. There was adrenaline. There was fear,
Sure.
curiosity. Everything was mixed up, and it was a change of state. And unfortunately, what happened after that was anytime I would feel a negative emotion, sadness or anger, or I would feel abandoned or neglected, I would try to change my state, right? Some people try to change their state with eating, some would
Yeah.
change it with different things. In my case, it was I would go and find something that had nudity because it would bring up that taboo feeling.
Okay.
And I continued doing that till I hit puberty. And when I was about 13, 14 years old, then I discovered masturbation and orgasm. And then a whole new world opened up to me. Because I was like, oh, it's not just adrenaline. I didn't know it was adrenaline, of course.
Yeah.
It's this amazing thing that can go so many ways.
Sure.
And what started as just innocent exploration of my sexuality, my fantasies, just exploring how far I could go with orgasm and what my mind could create, eventually became a behavior that I used as a coping mechanism for everything that happens. I mean, I'm sure
It's an escape.
teenagers are like
Sure.
freaking crazy.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Porn was the solution to everything for me. Breakup, porn. Rejection, porn. So I ended up
Boredom.
porn. Yeah, there you go. So it just built a relationship, and that's how it became a compulsive behavior for me.
Okay. Okay. And so when you say compulsive, I'm assuming this is more so than uh like, oh, hop on the internet, hop off once a week sort of thing, or like you said, because you were tying it to an emotion and you're tying it to problem solving and trying to use it as an escapism. When you say compulsive, am I right to assume that you were almost putting that before other things? That was like your first go to, your goal, your happy place. That was your hobby, if you will. Were you putting a
I'm a
lot of time into
connoisseur of
it?
it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's such a good question, JeGaysus. JeGaysus, right? I
Got
just
it.
need an excuse to say it.
Yes.
It's like, no, that's such a good question. Before I define compulsive in the sense of, in this context, it's probably important for me to say that when it comes to what my practice, elevated recovery, does with pornography, the first thing is we don't have a problem with pornography itself, right? So we understand that there are many people who use pornography as a means of relieving stress. Pornography does serve some of its benefits with people discovering themselves, opening up their minds, and so on. So when I say compulsive behavior, it's so important to say this because a lot of people will hear this and the assumption is immediately, oh my God, there must be some repressed, hidden, conservative or Christian deep reason root that he hasn't addressed that's making him do this. Absolutely not. I'm very open-minded. We help individuals who are engaging in pornography use, viewing pornography to the detriment of multiple domains of their life. Their financial life is being impacted. It's taking away from work. They're missing meetings because they're watching porn. Their porn use has escalated to the point that they don't get any satisfaction from what they're watching, no matter how crazy the genre is. They need to spend money on a chat site. They're on OnlyFans. They're spending their kids' college money on escorts and sugar babies, and they're doing all these things in a very irresponsible way. However, it's only compulsive when they try to stop, and despite their best efforts, they cannot. even
Right.
while it's having a negative impact on their life.
Right.
So that would be compulsive when it comes to this sort of behavior.
No, that's a good definition. That's a good explanation. I'm glad you went there, especially because I think even my concern having you on is like, how are we going to field this? Because I'm not, I'm not like, yeah, let's go. But at the same time, I'm not. I'm definitely not against like the banning or removal of pornography, and I'm all for freedom of performers and sex workers and people working on OnlyFans, like, go get your bag. So I was worried that we were going to have a conversation about like removing it and making it illegal. So I'm really glad that you cleared that up, and also defining compulsory to a point where, or compulsive, I should say, sorry, to a point where it is impacting your life. Much like what I would relate it to is it sounds like an OCD disorder from what I'm hearing, in the ways that you're describing it. And OCD has so many different ways it can present itself, right? And a lot of people are common with rituals for OCD. That's what they firstly think of, like, checking the doorknob 5 times before you leave the house, or having to leave and come back and leave and come back to make sure that the oven isn't on.
Mhm.
People think of OCD kind of in those extremes, but it is really similarly related, because a lot of people have OCD type personalities, but it doesn't become an actual disorder until it starts impacting your life. Like, if you're going to have to leave the house and come back multiple times, it's going to take you maybe an hour or two to leave the house to get to a job. And that starts impacting your relationships, your job appearance, your actual function, your ability, like you said, in financial ways that impacts you. So that sounds very similarly tied condition wise. I'm not like a doctor, so I'm not a
Yeah.
psychologist. Don't come at me. But that's what I'm hearing. That's
No,
I don't know if I'm right in saying that, but
that's a very interesting take. I would say that over the years, some of my clients definitely have their compulsive behavior definitely overlaps with some OCD traits, and maybe even magnifies some OCD traits. We have guys who are we call it HOCD, homosexual obsessive compulsive disorder, which I would define it as a complex issue, and it's Googleable.
I was gonna say I'm writing it down so I
Yeah,
can look this up.
where it's probably like
HOCD?
HOCD, homosexual obsessive compulsive disorder,
Okay.
which is where, and my term for it is porn induced. So there are some individuals who constantly worry about whether they are gay or not. That's one
Oh,
thing.
interesting.
That's
Okay.
one thing. But the OCD part comes in where they find themselves, let's say, checking out a guy. I'm talking about
Mm-hmm.
straight men here, checking out a guy, and then they're not sure. They freak out about it, and they
Yeah.
have to just keep checking out everybody to check if they are gay. Then they go home
Yeah.
and they're gonna watch. But it's I think in that situation, a lot of it is rooted in poor sexual education, not understanding. Like, I'm like, if you don't understand human sexuality, if you have been raised in a culture where you're not thought to understand gay people or people of different sexual orientation, and you only understand whatever the mainstream sexual orientation is, then you're just going to be scared of it. Like,
Exactly.
and what the way I try to guide men is, like, instead of being afraid of like being gay, which is really what keeps perpetuating it. Try
Exactly.
to understand human sexuality, understand that sometimes it is on a spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it is not. And even if it's on a spectrum, there's still some individuals who choose to live a certain way, right? So there's some individuals who have been bisexual, but they lived in a time, in an era where they couldn't express it publicly. So they
Yep.
did have to make a choice and live as straight men,
Yeah.
probably just like engaging in their behavior covertly.
Mm-hmm.
And then porn induced homosexual obsessive compulsive disorder is a little bit different. This is where a man for his entire life has been watching straight pornography, and there's just nothing else that gets him off.
Yeah.
Typically, these men will transition to transgender pornography, or pornography with transgender individuals. It
Mm-hmm.
works for them because there
Mm-hmm.
is a rush of adrenaline because of the
It's
taboo
new.
nature, the penis,
Yeah.
especially if it's male to female. but also the feminine characteristics, generalizing here, of course, of your typical transgender pornography actress or sex worker. The feminine behavior is highly exaggerated. And I think we could argue that there are some transgender individuals who are much more feminine in behavior because it's exaggerated than your typical feminine woman walking around. So men can get off to that. But unfortunately for them, it progresses to gay pornography. Then they get worried about their sexual orientation.
Which is so interesting because, I mean, that really highlights, I think, how widespread of a problem. I don't want to say widespread, maybe that's the wrong word, but this is a very narrow and niche look at a bigger widespread problem, which is compulsory heterosexuality. Just the assumption that we're all straight and how that's been burned into us, where these men very might well, like you said, be on a spectrum and they might just be finding that out. But the fear of it, the obsessive fear of, oh my God, what if I am bi? Like, why am I feeling attracted to God? That fear that drives them is so tied to the compulsory heterosexuality that they're raised with. And I think also, kind of like you were touching on at the beginning of the episode, I think it's very telling for anybody with a religious background, because there's so much shame that's put into a topic like homosexuality. Whereas for someone like me or someone like you who might be open, be like, just be gay, these are people who are raised to be hateful of or fearful of gay people. So when that coin flips and they start having man-to-man attraction, terrifying, especially if you think everyone's just like unchangeable, committed to hell, sodomites. Like that is burned into people very, very hard. I know of many men like that. I've had encounters with many men like that, not necessarily that were driven to it from porn, but just like guys who never been sexually attracted to other men, and when we get to vibing, they're like, I'd be down to try something, and then they beat themselves up for weeks after that. Or I'll get a message like, sorry, I deleted your number and blocked you because I didn't know what else to do. I was terrified. I've never been with a man before. Now I'm just confused. Because they let that fear, instead of just going with their actual feelings, going with their gut, going with what they feel safe with, override anything they were consenting previously. So it's really interesting. And I think it's good in terms of you having a program in which to help them, because so many men are not emotionally aware, I feel, especially American straight men. They don't have the same kind of emotional thought process as, say, a woman would, right? Where they check in with their feelings, they see what they want, they set goals, they're very intrapersonal and aware of how they are emotionally safe and or not safe, or if they need something, if they're lacking a relationship. Whereas men are much more just analytical thinkers, and so they don't have ways to process all the time without help those thoughts and feelings.
No, I absolutely
sorry, I went on like a little soapbox rant, but let's get back to you.
I think you just made a great point. I think a lot of men in the States feel that masculinity equates to emotional control, which I think to a certain extent it does, but nobody defines what that emotional control or emotional resilience is. And one of the things I try to educate my clients on is that emotional resilience also involves your ability to be very vulnerable with how you feel when you feel confused about something, when you feel conflicted, when you feel shame, when you feel guilt. It's the ability to feel these, to process these strong emotions, and still function at a high level and still have your self-esteem intact.
Yes.
Now, that's emotional resilience, because you're not repressing and you're not suppressing. You're like, I dealt with it. I know exactly how I feel. How do you feel? I feel confused, but at the same time, I don't feel less.
Doesn't define me. Right. Exactly. It's having to recognize that emotion, whereas so many in our culture are taught to run away from it entirely. It's saying like, wait, what's that feeling? Being able to name it, recognize it, and then, like you said, kind of step away from it and realize that doesn't control you. That's not your entire narrative. As compared to the obsession over it. What does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? Or going to anger, which for men is usually the top emotion that they can recognize and can feel and use as a tool. Instead of feeling scared or shameful, they instantly get violent and mad.
There you go.
And yeah, so I think it's super important to be able to learn how to categorize your emotions and figure out what's happening. So that's the good work.
Thank you. Thank you.
So for you, how old are you when you realized like this is a problem that I need to address? Like where were you? Was there like a moment? Like I don't want to say a rock bottom moment, but was there a relationship that ended or a job that was lost? How did you realize that you needed to go a different way?
Yeah. I realized it was a problem when I was about 17 years old. And this is when a lot of my friends were dating and having relationships. And I realized that I lived in a fantasy world where I couldn't date anyone. And if I couldn't, my world with them was in a fantasy world of orgasm. And then when I was about 22 years old in college, that was when I started acting out a little bit more. It's when I started I would drink, I would come back, I would go to the bars, I would try to meet people, it wouldn't work out, I would come back home, I would watch pornography, I would get on Craigslist. There weren't any apps. A lot of the behavior I used to engage in back in those days, these days people do it on apps, but I would get on there and try to meet people. And in one of these situations, I drove out to a neighborhood and it turned out to be a setup. It wasn't a babysitter who was putting the kids away and there was no one in the house and she was down for something. It was actually just a group of dudes who were, God knows what they wanted to do. But I was in my vehicle and the person was texting me and saying like, hey, just like pull up and, come out. And I was like, yo, it's an alleyway behind the house.
Yeah, sketch.
Yeah, what's going on? And very sketchy situation. And I'd been drinking and I was out of it and I've been watching porn. And then somebody smashed the window, like came at it.
In your car or in
my vehicle? I was in the car. The car was just still on drive. Put my foot on the accelerator, drove through their yard. And I just vividly remember driving home, freaking out. And just kept telling myself I wasn't raised like this. I wasn't raised like this. And realizing that I crossed the line. Like there were so many healthy ways to have done that, right? I could have had whatever, a relationship with somebody who could have come over. There were so many ways, but my behavior was to go out, to come back, to get drunk, and then to engage in extremely risky behavior. And this was the beginning. And that was when I made the decision to start finding a way to control my behavior.
Wow. I mean, that's terrifying, literally.
Yeah.
I mean, especially even now, like you said, the app world and I don't want to say hookup culture because it's whatever. I'm sex positive. Go hook up with everyone, have one night stands, people. But the fact that it's so often anonymous and you don't know what you are walking into until you show up is literally terrifying. I'm more on the asexual side, so I don't necessarily seek sex, but for me personally, that alone keeps me from dating because people are always like, come over and watch a movie at my house. I'm much more like, let's go to Starbucks. I don't know your freaking last name,
Yeah.
Not trying to die, especially in today's hot political climate where everyone's attacking gay people all the time.
Yeah.
But for it to actually have happened to you, that's like one of my biggest fears. But I can see how that would be a wake-up call for sure. Like that's scary, and God knows what they wanted to do to you. That's a horror movie. So where did you, and this was in America, right? You were
Yeah.
okay, in college in America. So where did you seek help? What was your You knew you needed a change, but what was
Yeah,
that look
I
like for you?
I tried everything. I went from therapy, 12-step groups, reading different books, browsing different forums. Um, the biggest thing that at that point in my life, I had separated from organized religion.
Yeah.
And I realized that it was already holding me back in relationships and beliefs. I was so judgmental. I
Mm,
had ruined my relationship with my siblings because I was trying to be holier than thou. So I separated from that. And then I came to realize that when I was trying to end this behavior, a lot of the material out there was like, why is this bringing up the same sort of guilt that I had? And then I realized that a lot of the recovery groups out there are rooted um, in Christianity and those
all
principles.
evangelical.
Yeah, even the
Hmm.
therapists who are not Christian still they're doing whatever DBT and REBT, rational emotive behavioral therapy, but they're still telling their clients who are struggling with addictive behaviors to go to a 12-step group where you
Right.
still have to admit that you are powerless. You still have to, give it all up to a higher power. And
Hmm.
there's nothing wrong with that. I think, factually speaking, a lot of people, it helps quite a few people.
It
But at
does.
the
Yeah.
same time, for others, I was one of those. It reinforced guilt. It made me feel like a bad person.
Yes.
I didn't want to feel powerless because that would mean that my future was defined by whoever the sponsor there was and
Yeah.
whatever their definition of success with sexual sobriety was. I wasn't a fan of celibacy as a means of ending a compulsive behavior because I believe that I was a sexual being and I had a
Hmm.
capacity for that. I
Hmm.
also didn't believe in some of the things they were sharing, like the only way you should have sex, the only way you can have healthy sex is if you are in a committed relationship. My belief was that you can have healthy sex when there is actually intimacy. And also realizing that we're also biological creatures, which means sometimes there's going to be sex without intimacy.
Yeah.
And you are the best expert at yourself, even if you
Right.
have a compulsive behavior. It's just that you may need the help of an expert or professional to guide you, but not to tell you what to do, not
Hmm.
to make you feel powerless, not
Hmm.
to tell you that once an addict, always an addict, and you're going to live with this for the rest of your life. And if you slip, you have to start from the beginning. None of those
Yeah.
things resonated with me.
Yeah.
So I took what worked from the different systems, retreats, all those things I went to, and I just kind of put together a system that worked for me. And I was
Okay.
fortunate enough that years later, when I decided to start helping other men, it was really what they needed because so many men had been in these groups for a long time and just really needed to hear a message that they were the experts at themselves and they could define
Mm.
this.
Yeah. I love that. I love that so much because um, I have a past of alcoholism, right?
Okay.
And as does my family. So I like grew up in AA rooms as a child.
Mm,
So like I'm very familiar with 12 step processes. And then as an adult, when it came to um, becoming sober and like getting away from that lifestyle per se, 12 step programs last thing on my mind, because I very well knew about how, again, like you said, the shame process of it, the guilting
mm,
process of it, the complete admission to being powerless over the addiction itself, letting the addiction still in that way rule your life because you can't control it. It's a disease. None of that resonated. So yeah, I mean, I didn't necessarily find another program, but I just
okay.
kind of did my own thing. But I totally understand that, especially with something that's so integral to life and social connections and relationships as sex. If you're not asexual and if you're allosexual, that's a part of life. Like you can't run from it. So it's definitely a better way to look at it than to be, like you said, totally cold turkey and or have this one allowance in missionary position when you're married
Yeah.
on Tuesday nights once a month. Like the sexuality doesn't work that way. So it's so cool that you came up with an alternative and focus on healthy habits rather than avoidance techniques, which is where it should be. Yeah, I love it.
Absolutely. We focus not just on the habits. The habits are good. Um, However, I feel that sometimes we only have capacity for a certain number of habits, and it's challenging enough to engage in certain habits um, when we're constantly trying to build new habits. There are people who are like, oh, I want to wake up early and I have this routine for my face, but I also want to work. I also want to work out, and I want to do a
Yeah,
guided meditation, and I should read more
yeah.
of these books. And then my therapist said I should be doing this, and so there are all these habits, and people end up doing nothing. So what I focus on with clients is we focus on the habits first, but we just focus on picking one or two habits that will be non-negotiables, and they have the freedom to pick the habits. I'm like, what's a habit that resonates with you, that works for you, and actually moves you forward, right?
Yeah.
Let's commit to that. But the second part of this is your lifestyle. That habit needs to become a part of your lifestyle, just like it's something that I do. But there's also a
Mm-hmm.
problem with lifestyle when it comes to the 12 step groups like AA, and it comes to ending an addictive behavior. They end with lifestyle. And what that means is the lifestyle is the lifestyle of somebody who goes to AA. So they tell you it's like their identity, like I am
Yeah.
a forever recovering, right? I'm a
Forever recover.
recovering this person because that's your lifestyle. And I
Yeah.
realized there was one final piece, which was self image. Your self image needs to permanently change to the self image of a person who does not need that behavior. And they don't teach you that. They teach you that your self image has to be the self image of a person who is recovering. Why? Because you keep relapsing and slipping. Therefore, you will never heal. That is
Yeah.
just crazy. Like just because
Totally
something
agree. Totally agree.
keeps
That's what I was saying. It's
happening.
like you're still a slave to the addiction because you're putting that first. It still has power on you. You're just hiding from it, but that's still giving it power.
Absolutely, absolutely. Same thing. It comes from the that root of you were born sinful,
Yeah.
and therefore you're constantly in this state of redeeming yourself
Mm-hmm.
from your sins. And here is this individual who died for those sins. And I'm not against any of those things. I just think it's important for people
It
to
works for
realize the
the
root of
people who
all
it
of
works
these
for, sure.
beliefs.
Yeah. Yeah. I was talking to a friend who is a recovering alcoholic,
Mhm.
and she was, I don't know if she's still considering doing it, but she's really looking into getting like groups of therapists using TikTok as a tool to reach out to other kinds of thinkers and developing not a 12-step alternative, but a different program entirely. Um, just that's more secular based because
Mhm.
no matter what you do, even if you are at an open and progressive group for say AA, they can say like, oh, music can be your higher power. It doesn't have to be God. It could be anything that you
Mhm.
consider bigger than yourself. It could be community or whatever. But at the same time, the roots are still all there. It's still based in that original sin, shame, guilt, powerlessness. Um, so there needs to be like a program that still has open opportunities. And I think you might have a great start to that in terms of, at least for this specific behavior. Um, and we need more of those because it works for some people, it doesn't work for others, and it becomes so much more painful. For example, if somebody were to relapse and then they've been told for the past 5 years that they're shit if they relapse, you know what I mean? And
Absolutely.
then that's just going to make them beat themselves up more. That shame is going to just and drive the behavior. So it's like a self fulfilling prophecy in that way. Um, but outside of that, we only have a couple minutes left. I did want to
Mhm.
cover how much of specifically within what you've seen around um, compulsive, is that the word we were using?
Yeah.
Compulsive uh, porn or sex addiction, or I don't want to say addiction, seeking behavior,
Hmm.
how much of that is rooted in, because I'm tying it back to the beginning of the conversation, you said you've
Mm-hmm.
picked up on patterns of religion across denominations, across countries. How much of the hypersexualization do you think comes from the shame of purity culture? And how do you think purity culture fits into this drive and or the shame that comes with it once you start participating in these activities? And then you're like, I'm no longer pure. Is there a big crossover there?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I've heard the term purity culture, and it makes sense. I think it explains itself. It's self-explanatory because we have so many people who come from this culture who grow up in a world where all those values that they had are being eroded. So they're developing a lot of shame. A lot of them are coping with the shame by running away from it. A lot of them are still discovering themselves. But
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, many of them develop issues later on in life because they still haven't dealt with the root cause of it. They haven't addressed it. So
Yeah.
even when they get into relationships, so while they're single and they're part of purity culture or on the fence or they've run away from it, they're fine. But once they get into a relationship or they get married, suddenly
Mm.
those values come up. It's the same thing, which you will see it a lot with um, guys who will get together with a girl, and the girl was exploring her sexuality, very sex positive, but suddenly the conditioning kicks in. It's like it's a button.
Yeah.
And she's just like, "Oh, I'm a born again Christian, and we're not going to have sex, and I'm just not going to do it till I get married. Till I get married." It doesn't change the fact that she's had a variety of experiences, and now she wants to be with a man who hasn't had that many experiences. But what she doesn't realize is that it's going to torpedo her marriage later on.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a random example of one of
Yeah.
the effects it has. But I have a lot of clients, a lot of my male clients have a conservative Christian background that was rooted in purity. And one
Yeah.
of the things I've noticed is that as they get older, many of them fall for like this. Have you heard of NoFap?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so a lot of them will do something like NoFap, and for them, they resonate with it. It's like
For the audience, that's just
yeah,
no
yeah,
masturbation.
no
Like,
masturbation, no porn, no
no
orgasm.
porn. Yep.
But what they don't realize over the years, I started doing this a year after NoFap was founded, and that was 2011. And anonymously, I started blogging about quitting pornography.
Yeah.
And a lot of the men who started doing it then now are experiencing things like porn induced erectile dysfunction, a lot of anxiety around
Mm-hmm.
sex. And that's because in the process of doing NoFap, they became repressed.
Yeah.
So what happens when you
You're
constantly
disconnected
try
from
to
your body.
deny your sexual
Mm-hmm.
behavior? Well, it becomes even more deviant and it affects your mental health even more. So a lot of those no-fap guys, semen retention dudes, are getting really messed up right now.
Yeah.
And they're ending up
Making it
working.
more taboo only increases the original behavior of it being so gated
Exactly.
and curious in the first place. It's just increasing and heightening that don't do this thing, whatever drive we have. It's so interesting, but there's other ways. And like you said, I think it's really important that you brought up the whole marriage thing. Like, amazing. If you want to wait till marriage, go for it. But also, there's so much of a relationship, and in terms of a sexual relationship, is sexual compatibility, and not knowing that before you commit to somebody legally for your life, not knowing whether you're going to be on the same page sexually is very hard. And I can assume as well, tying it back to purity culture, a lot of these men may have gone in both sides being virgins, getting married, waiting till marriage, and then finding out that they aren't good partners in the bed, and they start going elsewhere. They start turning towards pornography to because here they are told their entire life God's going to grant you a woman. You just wait. You save yourself. You're going to have a hot wife. You're going to have sex with her all the time, and it's going to blow your mind because that is God's gift to you. And then when they get married and that doesn't happen, they still are expecting some great sex. They're still expecting, like, well, might as well go here now. And I think that's a huge tie-in. And that's why you see, if you look at a map of pornography-driven websites, it's always the super conservative states that have the most traffic. Utah being number one.
Yeah.
And it makes sense. That's what happens when you make something taboo and don't have healthy conversations around it, and don't teach kids sexual maturity and how to safely explore, but also protect themselves and get what they need emotionally. And this is why consent conversations are important. Because it's not even just consent with your partners, it's also consent with yourself.
True.
And being able to tap into where just having a healthy emotional tied sexual life, you know? Absolutely. And we don't always tie sex and emotion together in the proper way, even when it's just ourselves.
True.
So yeah.
No, I like the way you view that. With the conservative thing, I think a lot of people also don't realize, a lot of religions may not realize, and this is just an internal perspective from speaking to these men, that they're very religious. They're a huge part of purity culture till the thing they were told that they would have, you're going to have this great woman and sex is going to be amazing and marriage is this amazing bond. And they go in and their dick doesn't work. The having sex with a virgin sucks. And
no.
Statistically speaking, it sucks. And it's they don't know what they're doing. They're not willing to explore themselves. And he's already been watching pornography here and there before that. So he retreats into pornography. But one thing that happens is they begin to realize that it is the beginning of them exiting their religion. And it's crazy because their churches, their bishops, their whatever don't realize that when you've told some people about sex, and later on they live in a culture that's highly sexualized, and they begin to explore themselves through pornography and meeting people on other apps, sex and orgasm is such a powerful driving force that it will cause them to leave that religion. They will not say it, but one of the reasons is because they're like, the woman realizes, oh my God, like I stepped out of my relationship and I realized I was capable of both clitoral and vaginal orgasms. And you're trying to tell me I have to be with this guy for the rest of my life or else, like, no. And this happens so often. We just don't hear about it because it's sexual behavior. And if the churches really wanted, and I have nothing against religion, I think religion is supposed to be a conduit to the divine and to the spiritual. That's all it's supposed to be, just an organized way of getting it there. But when you put human beings in there with power and greed, they just want to control people more, and they bastardize something that is rooted in something that's actually really beautiful. So that's the state of religion today. So if the churches or whatever really wanted to bring their flock back, so to speak, they would focus more on talking about the things that that they haven't. Start talking more about sex. Start talking more about pornography. Start opening up about all these things and having the conversations about them. But they won't.
And in the positive way, too. They need to do that in a helpful way, because I feel at the current state of the evangelical church as an organization across denominations, they're hyper focused on sex. It's all they talk about, but it's all they talk about in not having it. Wait until marriage. Try to avoid divorce at all costs. Don't be gay. Don't look at pornography. Don't masturbate, especially women, for purity culture wise, because you don't want them finding out that they can have an orgasm by themselves. Everything's on the don'ts. And that's, again, just driving that taboo. And it's so hurtful to the church because people will always have sexual feelings. It doesn't go away just because you're screaming at them from a pedestal to not ever look at porn. That's not how we
Yeah.
address the situation.
Fear was very effective years ago, but it's an outdated tool. Now, when you make people afraid with the internet and open communication, they will just find a group that makes them not afraid, and they will go and join that group because they feel safe there.
And it
Safety
makes
is so
them,
important.
to be honest, look kind of stupid. And when you're maybe not when you're super young because then it gets into you, but like when you're finally as an adult hearing them like yell like this is the worst thing that could ever happen is like, god forbid you and your wife have a three-way, your world will come crashing down. And then as an adult somebody talks to somebody who's in like a polyamorous relationship and actually is long-term committed to multiple people or something, then they're like, they're fine. You mean me and my wife can have a one night hookup with another partner and just be fine? The world doesn't collapse. It makes them look stupid for acting like the world's gonna end. So
Yeah, I think
yeah.
open-mindedness about, again, it really, we actually, I'll put just to, I'm out of time, but I wanted to,
Yes, sorry.
we have uh, uh, one of the coaches in our group um, had said that there were a few clients who had showed up to group coaching and they wanted to learn more about ethical non-monogamy. And she wanted to talk about that. And I was like, well, the group is made up of a mixture of many guys, but a lot of them have um, conservative beliefs. Like in my case, I'm in a committed relationship. I've been with the same person for 14 years. But we also work with a lot of people because they're like, damn, but you're willing to talk about these things and explore all of them? I'm like, absolutely. Just because I'm in a committed relationship for 14 years, I'm not
Sure.
like, you need to do that. That is the end goal. That will make you happy.
Right.
It is probably not most people's thing to
Right.
be in a relationship for that long. But we ran a poll. And in the poll, it was like, do you want to learn about it? Are you curious about it? Or no, thank you. I know exactly what I want from my relationship. And overwhelmingly was the second one. They believed that they knew what they wanted. And all of that showed was just how deep the conditioning goes, that there is only one way. And even though all the statistics show, right, just like, 70% of marriages, 56% of marriages are going to end in divorce. And those are just the marriages that are ending in divorce, not
Right.
the ones that are going to be just completely unhappy
Right.
marriages. So statistically speaking, they don't care. They're just like, yeah, I know I'm still going to take the chance, even though year after year that keeps growing.
Yeah.
But humans, that's what we do.
You gotta have room for the fluidity and the not knowing of
Yep.
everything. Every subject in life, you don't know.
True. True.
You think you know what you like? No, you don't. It's
No,
gonna be
you do
different
not.
tomorrow. You might like tacos today, and then tomorrow you're gonna find out, you know what? They put too much cilantro on tacos. I hate it. Gotta be open to the change, man.
Exactly. At the end of the day, if we could just all accept the fact that we don't know anything.
We don't know anything.
Nobody has the answer. We don't know things. We're just here for a short period of time and trying to make sense of everything. And most of the time we're wrong, but we just kind of deal with it. And
that's it. That's the religion I follow. We don't know jack shit. And admitting it's half the problem. Just gotta admit it. All right. Well, I will let you go, but before you leave, can you please tell people where to find you? Drop your socials or your website or anything that you may have coming up, such as a workshop. This is your time to let them be a JK follower.
Yeah, for sure. Well, search for me by my name. It's JK, just the initials. Last name is Emezi, like amazing, Emezi. And you can find me at elevatedrecovery.org. We got our YouTube channel, which is called Porn Reboot, P with the reset button in the middle. We also have a very popular podcast called the Porn Reboots Podcast as well, where you can learn more about this behavior. You can also find me on Facebook, Porn Reboot or Elevated Recovery or J.K. Emezi. There's going to be a page for each one. We have a wonderful, private, discreet Facebook group if you're struggling with this. And maybe you're just not sure if you have a compulsive behavior. You're like, oh my God, I watch a lot of porn. Do I have a problem? Well, join the group, ask some questions. You can post anonymously. It's a safe space for you. And just find out. hang out with us, even if you got to hang out with us for a couple of years. Just hanging out for free, just learning and figuring this stuff out. We're not in a rush. Figure yourself out, and we're here to support you if you know for certain that you have this compulsive behavior.
Awesome. I love it. I loved having you on. I feel there's so much more we can get into, but it's been a pleasure talking to you.
For sure. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you for taking the time. And I will be following your YouTube for sure and making sure that I stay up to date on anything you do.
I actually just saw yours. I have it pulled up in a tab, so I'm going to follow it.
Oh, yeah. And then outside of that, I guess I'll just sign off. If anybody needs me, my username's JeGaysus pretty much anywhere. And if you're listening to this as an audio on, say, Apple or Spotify or wherever else they still have platforms, make sure to go ahead and leave a rating. I hear that helps. I don't know if it's true, but leave me a comment, leave me a rating and a review. Or if you're watching on YouTube, make sure that you are subscribed and following. If you want to join the YouTube channel for exclusive member-only videos and emojis, I guess, you can do that. But we also have a Discord that opens up with either Patreon membership or YouTube membership. And that is our private community where we can discuss all things religion and theology and hang out. So check that out if you like. But thank you for being here. And until next time, this has been Untracing Trauma with your host, JeGaysus, and today's special guest, J.K Emezi. And we'll talk to you later. Bye.